So you've created your animation, finessed it with the F-curves, but that's just the beginning. To really enhance an animation or motion graphics project, you're going to want to hit specific audio beats, and adding music or sound effects will go a long way to enhance and reinforce the visual by adding another dimension to the final animation. Adding sound to a Cinema 4D project isn't immediately obvious. There's a few steps you need to take to get it to work. So let's take a look at how we'd add sound to our project. First, we need a place to store some sound, and a sensible object would be a null. So we'll just create a new null object, and I'm going to rename it to sound. Next, we need to open up the timeline. So Shift F3 will bring up our timeline, and we will need to drag the sound null into the timeline. If you can't see it, we need to just reset the view. You can choose bookmarks, default bookmark, and that's a good way of getting back to your standard view. And then we can just drag in the sound null. Right click on the sound null and choose Add Special Tracks Sound. And then when we click onto that, if we have our Attributes Manager open, you can see that we can load in a sound by clicking the button here. So we're going to use this bounce wave that we have. And if you twirl down this little arrow, you can see the waveform in the timeline. You can just frame all of that. And then if the audio file was created with the tempo embedded, C4D will read that and let you know what it is. So that's quite useful to know as well. Just be aware that the sound file needs to be an AIF or a WAV, can't be an MP3. So when we play back the timeline, we'll hear a sound. And if I just drag that back a bit, that's because we have the use sound checked. If we don't want to hear the sound, we can just turn that off. All right, so let's look at our animation and the sound file side by side. So we're quite out with this at the moment. We probably want our sound to happen at the first hit of the ball bouncing onto the stairs. So that is around frame 12. So we can change the start time of the sound file to be frame 12. What we can do now is start to mark out the points in the sound where the hits should be. And these are the markers that we can use. So we can just create a marker at the current time. What we can do is just play through the animation a bit to get a sense of where the beats are. Okay, so it looks like there's one here. Looks like there's one here. So I'll add a marker there. There's one around about here as well. It's about there. Sounds like there's a beat there. And then maybe one around there as well. So if we just see if we're hitting the right beats here. Okay, so our animation needs a bit of tweaking, doesn't it, to fit with the beats. So that's our first one. So our animation is a bit behind, just a little bit. So what we can do is we can drag the cube into the timeline, and then we have those keyframes available to us. And we're just going to focus on these values here. So what we could do, if we just twirl this back, and make sure. So what we need to do is probably just select all those keyframes, the ones after as well. And then up here in the timeline, we can just move this over so that it just bounces on that marker we've created. So we've got the beat there. So that looks like it's bouncing a little bit too late. And then we would just select these keyframes and move this over so it's hitting that beat. I think that one's actually in now. So let's just rewind and we'll see if we're in. looks like we've got everything in there. There might be a bit of finessing to do, and you can then check your side views as well that we haven't, by adjusting the keyframes. Yeah, that looks okay. I was looking down in this area here just to see that by adjusting the keyframes, you can change certain parameters and make things go out of sync. So, for example, the ball could then be bouncing into the stairs if we're changing the Y height and things like that. So I'm going to turn off that sound so we don't have to hear it each time I scrub through, and just play that back just so you can see. 1, 2, 3, and it bounces nicely. So now we can add sound to the projects. One thing that I don't want to leave you with is not being able to see, because we have animation on things like this camera as well, but we can't see that in the timeline. And so we need to make sure that we have a way of getting back to that. And bookmarks are a way of saving a view in the timeline. And we can just go back to our default bookmark, and that will give us all the animation that's in our project. So we have access to the camera once again, and the sound, and our cube. So bookmarks are a really useful way of sort of creating different views, but just remember the default bookmark will always get you back to the default standard view. And another way is just choosing automatic mode, but that can bring back more things. The main useful one is this default bookmark, so just be aware of that. Now we've added sound to our projects. We started by creating a null object to store the sound. Then we dragged that null into the timeline, created a special track called audio. Then we loaded the sound file in, and we could play back the result in the timeline. We used markers to pick up specific beats in the music based on the audio, and then we adjusted our animation to match those beats.